Good afternoon. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to acknowledge that our conversation is being held virtually on the lands of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. I'm dialing in from Wurundjeri and Boomerang land. I'm Melissa Bianca-Amore, and I'm the lead curator for the Conversation series, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the Melbourne Art Fair. We are delighted to present the panel discussion, The Role of Public Art and Architecture in Framing Notions of Place, Shifting Perception and Activating Social Change. Public art and architecture has the potential to transform the way we interact with culture, sight, and notions of public. This panel brings together leading public art commissions, curators and artists to discuss the role of public art and architecture in framing conceptions of place, perceptual orientation, and social and cultural engagement. We ask, can public art and architecture shift and motivate social change? And in what way can architecture do this? How can we most sensitively and effectively connect to country while recognising our colonial and settler histories? How can we best work to overcome limitations and constraints to the commissioning, design, and shaping of our shared social spaces? To moderate this really exciting panel is Director of Monash University Museum of Art, Charlotte Day. Charlotte Day has been the Director at Monash University Museum of Art since 2013. She has extensive curatorial and arts management experience, having worked in contemporary art organisations including the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, Centre for Contemporary Photography, Gertrude Contemporary, and the Michael Buxton Collection of Australian Art. With a reputation for innovation and collaboration, she spent over 2 decades curating local and international programs and projects. Most recent exhibitions include co-curating with Dr. Brian Martin Tree Story and curating Connecting the World Through Sculpture at MoMA in 2021. Co-editing with Callum Morton and Amy Spears, the reader Let's Go Outside, Art in Public, launched yesterday at the Melbourne Art Fair, and working with ARM Architects on a series of art columns for the Monash Chancery in 2020. It is an absolute delight to welcome you, Charlotte Day, and thank you very much for moderating this panel for the Melbourne Art Fair Conversation series.
Thank you, Melissa, very much. And I'd really like to congratulate you on the program you put together for the fair. It's really ambitious. I'm very pleased to be part of it. And also thank Esther and James for providing support for our session this afternoon. I would also like to acknowledge that the Melbourne Art Fair and where I'm located at Monash are on the country of the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And also, particularly at Monash, we like to acknowledge our connection to material and creative practices on these lands for more than 65,000 years. This acknowledgement of place is actually at the crux of today's panel discussion and our thinking about place, that we are on First Peoples unceded lands. It's vital that we reflect on our relationalities to this place or the place where we may be working or making art. And art and architecture's potential to frame place, to shift perceptions of place, and increasingly, I would argue, to reveal what we may have been covered or built over in a place, to open up spaces for more things to be able to be conceived or take place in them, as well as to broaden the range of voices and perspectives hosted or held in place. I'm keeping my introduction pretty short because we have an esteemed panel this afternoon of 5 creatives, and I really want to give them the space to be able to speak. So we've got John Denton, Judy Watson, Lou Weis, Barbara Flynn and Jamie Perrow. I'm going to introduce one at a time, and different speakers are presenting different ways, but we'll kind of go through each presentation or conversation, and then hopefully we'll end up with a bit of time left for discussion between us. So firstly, it's my great pleasure to welcome Judy Watson, one of Australia's most highly regarded and accomplished artists. Judy's Aboriginal matrilineal family is from Wanya country in northwest Queensland. Her art making process involves evolves by working from sight and memory, revealing Indigenous histories and following lines of emotional and physical topography that centre on particular places and moments in time. She's been exhibiting extensively since the 1980s. Judy co-presented Australia at the 1997 Venice Biennale. Her work is held in major Australian and international collections, including at the NGA, all Australian state galleries. She's part of the MCA Tate Modern Relationship in London, Taipei Fine Arts Museum, and even here at Monash. She's had many significant solo shows, but most recently at the Art Go of New South Wales last year and at the Icon Gallery, Birmingham, England in 2020. It's fantastic to have Judy with us because she is an artist who actually has worked in the public realm for quite some time. So she has a lot of experience in this regard. And I think we thought we might start, Judy, by me asking you where and what was the first public art project you made. Should I share my screen too with your presentation?
Yes, please.
Everyone can see that?
Yep. Yes.
Sweet. Shall I just keep moving, Judy, and then you tell me?
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to introduce country to begin with, and just also acknowledging traditional owners of the country I'm speaking from and the traditional owners of the site, from the Kulin Nations where the Melbourne Art Fair is happening. And my matrilineal family is from Wanya country in northwest Queensland. This is Budjamala here, Lawn Hill Gorge, and our country is cut by the Queensland Northern Territory border. So some of these images are from a recent trip in 2021 back to country, including this gorge with family. You can keep going. Thanks, Charlotte. Wanya people are known as running water people. I live in Brisbane on the lands of the Yogo Turrbal people, and I try and research material and history for my own area of northwest Queensland and visit when I can. My ancestry and my country are the touchstone of my work and are overlaid by my experiences as a cultural traveller. Keep going, thanks. Working in other countries, I've focused on the histories and contemporary events in those places, excavating memory and sight, repositioning these into my work. And within Australia, when I'm invited to work with other people and other Aboriginal communities, it's like I'm in another country. It's another language, another place. I'm a stranger and I have to learn from the ground up. My public art commissions have been in other places, in other people's country, and I've been privileged to be asked to make work about these places for their communities. And as for your question, Charlotte, 1994 was the first time that I made a public artwork for Kazula Power House in Western Sydney. I don't have an image of it, but in my talk, I was thinking about what it was like to make that work. And the first work I would like to talk about is Warwick, Melbourne Museum. Because of where the art fair is focused, I thought it would be good to go onto that one.
And it's nice also that it connects with John Denton, who's on our
panel. Exactly.
And
that's
DCM
right.
were the architects for, I presume they commissioned it for you, with you, Judy.
Yes, well, I'm sure John can talk about that. So this one from 1999 is Warwick, meaning to speak in the Wamba Wamba language of Victoria. Arnie Joy Murphy chose this name for the etched zinc wall at Melbourne Museum. It wraps around Bunjalaka, the Indigenous Cultural Centre there. John Denton from DCM was on this project, and they were the people who decided on the zinc material for the wall. It might have been John himself. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, zinc is one of the materials mined at Mount Isa, where a lot of my family grew up. So I worked with the staff at Museum Victoria and Aboriginal people from the Victorian community to access and develop the ideas and images for this project. You can keep going if you like, Charlotte, and just two other artworks. But there was an incredible generosity and sharing of knowledge from everyone I encountered. I wanted the images to float along the wall, to be viewed as you walked along it, a filming experience. And as an artist coming from elsewhere, from Queensland, I was made welcome and granted access to Aboriginal material, culture and sites of significance in Victoria. The Indigenous Cultural Advisory Board of the museum wanted the wall to show the diversity of Aboriginal culture from Southeast Australia and its distinctive nature. I was chosen as a commissioned artist by the Indigenous Advisory Board because of my knowledge and experience with the etching process. I then asked that the Australian Print Workshop, who etched the panels, and Melbourne Museum run workshops for local Indigenous artists in the etching process. They did this, and these continued since 1999 and became an ongoing collaboration between the two institutions. I'm not sure, you can keep going now because this is other works, sorry. Became an ongoing collaboration. I'm not sure if they're still going, but I know that many of those artists went on to have major careers. An exhibition of the prints from these etching workshops travelled around to local communities in Victoria. And one of each of the prints produced by the artist was bought by the Melbourne Museum, which was fantastic for the artist and for the museum. The artists were shown through the holdings of the museum, just like I was, and this provided source material for them if they wished to use it. For me, it was enriching and educative to learn about culture from another language group to myself. Do you want me to go on, Charlotte? I was going to talk about site-specific work.
I think maybe, do you want to, I think you've brought up some really important things already, that there was a governance structure there and a way of consulting that you could feed into, which obviously is incredibly important. And also that the way you approached the project brought people into it with you, so that you got people to collaborate with you, which I think, kind of sets the tone for an approach to practice and to thinking about being on country, particularly when it's not your own country, and how you can go about that. Should we just segue a bit to those two really recent projects in Sydney that I know, you mentioned are interconnected. One was completed a couple of years ago, but one's still to be unveiled, but maybe talk a little bit about those.
I can, if you keep going. So this is a recent one, Beautiful. Not so recent, 2016, Narunga Nangama. If anybody goes there, it's at 200 George Street, Sydney, and it wraps around to the left and to the right of these walls. So you've got many faces of it, and a lot of it is to do with the archaeology of the place, what the archaeologists found, including that large sort of ellipse shape on the right is from one of the wells found on the site. And when I was doing a residency at the British Museum, I found the beautiful net bag on the left, which was labelled from Port Jackson in the 1780s. And they identified that it came from the brachychiton, a Kurrajong tree. Often there's the brachychiton Illawarra flame tree, but it's a different version of it, possibly. And the white down the bottom is a reference to middens. You probably know that many of the middens in Sydney were taken by the colonists, collected on rafts, burnt for their lime, which was then inserted into the mortar between stones in the old buildings. So I think of the DNA from Aboriginal people who collected and ate, the shells and discarded them on the pile, and that DNA is still in there. So all of those old buildings in Sydney have living Aboriginal culture within them, literally within their walls. And this work was made being incised with routers, and it was infilled with automotive paint and stenciled. And this was worked on with UAP, and we're out Gosford Quarry working on the stones on the ground until it was installed at a later date. And there's also lighting which goes onto this work. Yeah. Do you want me to go on to the...
Yeah, it's such a beautiful piece, and that, the monumentality of it, but then it's so delicate and has so many layers as well. It's like that, and that's real quality in your work, isn't it? That it can often be quite large or very spatial, but then it's very delicate and intimate as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's come from printmaking too, being able to sort of like do the layering and go from small to large. Now, did you want me to talk about the bara?
Yeah, so maybe, yes, yep. Should I just go through to here?
Yeah, sure. Here we go. So soon to be revealed in Sydney, the bara is a messenger to the domestic and international traveller that this is Aboriginal land. The bara fishhook will enfold and embrace all within its reach. The crescent shape is a beautiful expression of Aboriginal technology, utilising the shells to fashion the fishhooks used by women who dangle them from their Ngawi canoes. The bara are like a reflection of the moon in the sky, the bays in the harbour, the sails of the Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I love looking at the exquisite and luminous Barra shell hooks in collections, including at the Australian Museum. And on this site, which you will see is in front of Government House, the Botanical Gardens in Sydney, I imagine the scarification of the water crisscrossed by all those Aboriginal families' journeys across the harbour. I pay homage to those ancestors of this place and their descendants who've sat here before us looking across the same body of water that we're looking at today. And I imagine them gathering, feasting and sharing their culture with each other. Now we are part of this bigger story. Barra shell hooks are still being unearthed around these waterways, making themselves known to archaeologists in the community and reasserting the Aboriginal presence and history of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And the Barra connect the viewer to the bloodline of ochre that flows along the cultural ribbon of significant sites, magical, uplifting, giving the space an otherworldly feeling, dreamlike and beautiful. And it will provide a quiet space for ceremony, reflection and contemplation in a busy and ever-changing city. The Sentinel forms will be inspiring and educational, iconic and transformative.
When is that actually happening, the Barra? Is it in production now?
No, it's there waiting to be unveiled. So, it's there. So you will see it after next weekend.
Wow.
It's going to be an amazing launch.
Yeah,
it will be.
Everyone's been hanging out for that. And could you just say, I mean, just, we'll keep it simple, but just how did you, starting with those amazing shells, that and that are effectively tools, I suppose, well, maybe more than that too. How did you decide what scale to then make this work?
Well,
I'm always interested in scale.
Sure. Anybody at UAP who I've been working with on this, we went through so many different renditions of this work. And of course, we had things like COVID, not being able to go to Italy or, China or other places for me to be on the ground there, or, other people like Richard Johnson from Sydney to be on the ground, etc. So it was having to make things in other places and in the end coming down to one iconic Barra shell. And it also, Hetty Perkins was a curator on this project, and it was very much a cultural conversation along the way, thinking about what the integrity was of the vision and the strength and what was going to be the most iconic motif in terms of how we could, really tether this to place and make it that messenger for people. So we had somebody from the City of Sydney over on the Sydney Harbour Bridge climbing it, looking across, and we had a piece of white material hanging down. And we also went over to the Sydney Opera House steps, looked back across, and we were looking at things as well as online in place. And this is how we came up with this particular scale. So it's been
it's going to be magnificent, isn't it?
Yeah. It is, but it hasn't been an easy journey.
But I think when you look at these, it feels like it was the missing part of the puzzle, that there's been these other structures there and something was missing. And I think once people see it there, they'll be like, it's kind of come home. It's where it should be. It's come home. It should have already been there.
I'd say that there's probably many of these Barras still under the ground, and they are uncovering themselves and revealing themselves. So I agree.
It's amazing work. And good to see women artists making really powerful works too. Thank you, Judy. We'll leave it.
Should I say not just me, a lot of other people worked on this.
And
the team,
which is a good segue. I'll stop sharing. So now I'm going to actually introduce Jamie. Sorry, so I'm not sharing now. Good.
Would you like me to share my screen, Charlotte?
Yeah, that'd be great. So Jamie Perrow is Senior Principal Art and Design at Urban Art Projects, UAP. And as Judy mentioned, she's worked with UAP a number of times. In Jamie's leadership role within the creative team at UAP, he oversees the creative direction of some of UAP's most significant art projects, collaborating with local and international emerging and established artists, architects, designers, including Klaus Oldenburg, Jeff Koons, Kors, Ai Weiwei and Lindy Lee, as well as influential architectural studios such as KPF and Zaha Hadid's design. He has worked on projects in Australia, USA, Saudi Arabia and China, and has recently moved home to Sydney, Australia, after working in UAP's New York studio and previously in their Shanghai office for the past decade. So it's great to have you here,
Thanks.
Jamie, and welcome
Thanks,
back.
Charlotte. Thank you.
Back. You couldn't have come back at a better time, could you?
Yeah, speaking of notions of place, it's good to be home.
I know. Maybe I know you're going to present a bit on a couple of projects, but could you maybe just articulate for our audience that might not be so familiar with how Urban Art Projects works and your focus? Can you just give a bit of a general outline?
Yeah, sure. So Urban Art Projects, Australian-based company founded about 30 years ago. And we're in 3 regions, the North America, here in Australia, and China and Asia Pacific. And we're a little different in each region, but essentially we partner with artists and architects to deliver both small but also ambitious scale works of public art, and occasionally private commissions as well. And we have a full team of designers and project managers and incredibly talented craftspeople on our workshop floors that kind of build a scaffold of support around an artist to help deliver their vision. I suppose is what we do in a nutshell.
I mean, it is interesting because historically, I suppose the artists that could work in the public realm were often quite reduced to a particular group of artists that had confidence with, different kinds of materials and things, didn't it? So,
yeah,
like what you do and other kind of fabricators and, other commissioning people too, is being able to open that up to more artists.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, it's interesting because I'm not a creative myself, I suppose, in that process of delivering public art, but the artists definitely entrust us with their vision. And as Judy just mentioned, it's not often an easy journey. It can be a really complex process for an artist to go through, even an artist as incredible as Judy, who has done it for so long. It's pulling an artist out of their studio and having them work across an incredibly complex array of new constraints, new materials, is a challenging process. So I suppose that's what we do, and there's a lot of other incredible makers out there and fabricators as well, both here in Australia and globally, that do it too. I've got a little bit of a unique position, I suppose, because I'm not the creative itself, but we do kind of hold that vision for the artists.
And when we had a brief catch up the other week, and I was kind of like asking you around, where do you think the most potential for innovation is, in the work you do or the way you work?
Well,
I think you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's great to come after Judy because I think she epitomizes, in my mind, for a work to impact place and impact notions of place, there's a couple of kind of key ingredients to that delivery process, I think, that are critical. You need an artist like Judy, or an artist that has a really strong vision and a strong story to tell, and a strong desire to make an incursion or a integration into the public realm with their vision, some kind of a bold repositioning of form. So having an artist that has that clarity of voice and a story and different perspective to tell is an absolute key ingredient for a work to have impact, to impact place and the community that work inhabits. But I also think that in order to do that, in order for an artist to be able to make that kind of bold statement and deliver the bold vision, they do need a partner that they trust. And I'd say that because I am one of those partners, I suppose. But there's a wonderful quote from Frank Gehry from quite some time ago and it's a very long quote, but he basically talks about the world being a canvas now. And I think that a lot of artists through the public delivery process are looking at the world, the full world, the sky, the walls, the ground, the air, every aspect of the spaces we inhabit now are seen as canvases by artists. And when an artist makes a decision to deliver a bold vision, it is complex. There's a lot of additional partners that are required to deliver that work. So I had two projects I wanted to talk to, Charlotte. You mind if I?
Go for it. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So the first project I wanted to talk about was a work that I was a part of over in America at the end, towards the end of 2019 and through 2020, and it was by an American artist called Weis, and it was called Rumors of War, and it was a direct response to Weis also was you might remember was the presidential painter of Barack Obama, incredibly successful and quite well-known work. But he delivered a concept for a work that was a direct response to the ubiquitous Confederate sculptures that populate all of America, particularly the South, which themselves were kind of originally pretty powerful physical manifestations of trying to shift the perception of social order and a perception of place themselves. But his concept was based on this one particular work in Virginia of a Confederate general called Jeb Stuart. And the work that he delivered was installed, that we cast with him, was installed in the middle of Times Square initially. And it's identical to the Jeb Stuart piece that has now been removed, along with a range of other sculptures in America. But the Jeb Stuart sculpture has since been removed. But when he was developing the concept of this work, it was still standing in place in Richmond. He 3D scanned the entirety of that original work and essentially reproduced it at the exact scale, about 10 meters tall, 8 or 9 ton. So there was a lot of complexity for us in the delivery process. But essentially, what he did is he reimagined who that monument was celebrating. So sitting astride the horse rather than a Confederate general is an African-American youth in streetwear wearing Nikes with dreadlocks. And the purpose of the work for him was to present a different story, present, who is it that the people in our communities, who is it that is being celebrated, that are being looked up to and are being represented. So his was a direct challenge to the kind of histories and the stories that had been presented historically, particularly in the South. And what's kind of incredible about this work for me was the timing around it. So it was installed in Times Square towards the end of 2019, and the debate about Confederate sculptures has been raging in America for some time, but it was kind of a fire was lit under it by Trump's very fine people on both sides comment. And over the course of the 3-month installation in Times Square, and then where it went to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, which is shown in this video here, finally, over the course of that time, the protests around Confederate sculptures transitioned into the Black Lives Matter movement and protests, and a huge array of sculptures were defaced and removed entirely. And this particular artwork was called Rumors of War. And I remember waking up one morning and seeing this image of a protester standing on one of the sculptures holding up the sign, Rumors of War wasn't a rumor. And for me, it was such a vivid example of how art doesn't just have to be a mirror to what is happening around it. It can be a really active participant in that process. And so today, Kahindi's work sits in Virginia and it remains untouched whilst all the other sculptures have been defaced and removed. And so I think in terms of whether or not an artwork can activate social change or be an active participant in that social change, this particular project for me is just an incredible example of that.
It is amazing the timing of it. When we had we did a symposium around public practice in 2019, and our keynote was Tania Bruguera, who's a Cuban artist but now based in America. And one of her key I suppose, things in her toolbox that she uses for her public art or her projects is timing, and she talked quite specifically about timing. So sometimes timing can be, I suppose, it can happen to you, but you can also harness it.
You can absolutely harness it.
And I suppose there was a bit of both going on with this project. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, definitely. An absolute powder keg of a kind of situation over in America at the time that the work was about to be installed. So,
and it's nearly a bit bigger than we've got time for, but I suppose the idea too of not just what we add into places, but perhaps going forward what we might also choose to remove.
Absolutely.
Or, resituate or whatever is like as big a topic, really.
Definitely.
Do you want to touch really quickly on your next one, or do you want?
I can, but I'm also conscious of time.
Okay, well, maybe we'll come back if we have time.
Yeah,
is that all right?
Yeah, let's do that. Yep, sure, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. Such strong images.
Could I just add something, Charlotte?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a group called Monument Lab operating out of Philadelphia, and they were just, you might have heard The World Around, this program running out of the Guggenheim. They spoke, so founded by artists, but also doing this, very comprehensive catalog of what those monuments are, what's missing, what people are not depicted. It was a fascinating talk, which everybody can find online.
Yeah, I think, was that at ABC Arts?
No, it was
because I've definitely listened to it. It was really
well, maybe.
Yeah. And I mean, we could definitely do the equivalent here, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of focus, and rightly so, on the debate around whether those sculptures remain or are removed. But for me, what's more important is what are they replaced with? Like, what do we over the coming generations replace them with? Whose stories we're representing, and making sure that's as inclusive and diverse as possible.
I think there's also an argument potentially for some augmentation, just changing the text.
Yeah.
Maybe putting a different like headdress on or something.
It's a very heated debate, and it comes down to everyone's lived experience. I think what position they take on the issue. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was great, Jamie. I'm now really pleased to be able to introduce John Denton, who's the director of Denton Corker Marshall, DCM, which was co-founded in 1972 with Bill Corker and Barry Marshall. DCM has become one of the most significant Australian-owned international architectural and urban design practices. Locally in Melbourne, their work has shaped much of our city, including the Exhibition and Convention Centre that the Melbourne Art Fair is being held at this year, as well as many iconic buildings and structures. In 1996, DCM directors were honoured with the Gold Medal for the Royal Australian Institute of Architects, the Institute's most prestigious award. Between 2006 and 2008, John was the appointed Victorian Government architect, advising the Premier and Cabinet on how to achieve better architecture and urban design outcomes. He is currently on the Victorian Government Design Review Panel and holds and has held numerous board positions, including as current chair at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, president at the Australian Print Workshop, and member of the Victorian Endowment for Science, Knowledge and Innovation. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
I know when we had a brief chat the other week, we talked about your early, kind of linking to what Judy was talking about too, your early experiences of public art, and you've got one that's well, I suppose it's renowned, isn't it? Should we say?
I think so. Now, I haven't got any pictures, but I thought just talking about the ideas, because what I'd like to do is talk very quickly about a couple of commissions that we commissioned, and then talking about a couple of projects that we did, because this is about art and architecture. Yes, the one that you're referring to was the Ron Robertson Swan vault sculpture, which became known as the Yellow Peril in its time, which we put into the City Square. We won the City Square competition in 1976, I think. And about that time, there was a book by Margaret Robinette called Outdoor Sculpture, which was very an interesting book to go, because one of the things about the competition was we decided that the city square was simply a space between the Melbourne Town Hall with its clock tower and the St Paul's Cathedral with its spire, and we wanted the square to have a presence of its own. So we wanted something to signal it. So in the competition, we put a great big Alexander Calder sculpture in it to signify the sort of thing that we wanted. When we proceeded with the work, we then looked at Australian artists and ended up choosing Ron Robertson Swan's vault sculpture, which was bright yellow, which made up for its not being quite as high as the Calder.
Oh, really? So did you work with him did he design it for that space? Was that
yes?
We had. You were a pretty young firm then, also, to be doing.
We were.
The trying to reclaim the centre of Melbourne as a place that people might like to hang out.
Yeah.
Or it was kind of also to do with the Queen coming, wasn't it?
No. She just
later?
No, she just happened to turn up later.
Yeah.
So
it did do what it was meant to do in terms of anchoring that?
Well, it certainly did. I mean, because it was there. It was big and it was yellow. You noticed it, and for us, that's what it was. That was about, was symbolising this is the square. This is not just a space between two other big buildings, of each with their own significance. And I think that was sort of what we were trying to do with it. And obviously, it got quite infamous in the same way as about the same time, a big Richard Serra sculpture in New York got moved, taken away. The change of mayor meant that the new mayor came in and hated it and got rid of it. So the original sculpture cost $76,000 to make and install. It cost them over $80,000 to remove it and put it somewhere else. But it's fortunately now back outside the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, which is a nice place for it to end up.
And it's actually, I mean, I see, I walk past there a lot. It's a sculpture that people interact with a lot.
Yes.
Because you can move under it and between it, and, it kind of shifts your view of the landscape, the land around it as you move. It's kind of, I suppose it's maybe it was a bit subtle for the times or something, or you're ahead of the times with it.
I don't. Well,
but it's nice now because it's in relationship.
We weren't really ahead of our time, because certainly, the Calder and Sarah and De Suvero and Clem Meadmore were all doing big pieces of sculpture in America. So
maybe just for our local context.
Just for our local context, it
all
might
changed
have been.
now.
Yeah. But I was just interested because I was looking at that book by Margaret Robinette, and she said that in the past, public sculpture was normally memorialisation of men or commemoration of events, whereas she felt that now it was about enhancing its setting, contributing to the quality of life, but still being able to symbolise something. And that there was a sort of it's the change in what sort of happened. The second one I want to talk quickly about was the we won the competition to do the Governor Phillip Tower, Governor Macquarie Tower, and Museum of Sydney in Sydney, and we created a plaza on top of where the first remains of the first government house were, and we commissioned a piece of work which we thought was immensely appropriate, which was by Indigenous artist Fiona Foley, together in collaboration with Janet Lawrence, and it's called The Edge of Trees, and it relates to the quotation. I'm not sure where it comes from, but that talks about when I think when the first white men arrived, they were observed by the Indigenous owners of the land, traditional owners of the land, from the edge of the trees. And so it had a nice symbolic thing, and it was nice that it sits there on the edge of the square, the Museum of Sydney Square, and is all about these great big sticks that are all been carved and engraved, and there's sound and various things that happen to it. But it's a lovely thing for people to move in and out and around, and it was just a really nice piece. And I think it also has significance, or it has importance in that place. And then I want to
interestingly, because that was so that was in the 90s, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's I suppose 10, 15 years later.
Yep.
Things had already shifted quite dramatically.
They had
in how people were thinking about the place they were in,
Yeah, well, I mean, I recall in 1976 when we were looking for sculptors to complete, to be paid to do maquettes for the city square, there was very few artists that were prepared to contemplate large monumental sculpture. They all just said, no, we just do what we do, and it's not big, it's this and that or what, and it wasn't a big, there wasn't a big field to choose from. So they were the two commission projects. I wanted to very briefly talk about couple of projects that we've done, and one of them is the Melbourne Gateway, because again, and that's sort of, I guess that sits somewhere between art and architecture.
Yeah, that's controversial, John, isn't it? Is that an architect being an artist?
Yeah, is an architect pretending to be an artist? Yeah, not good, shouldn't do that.
Or is it, it's like infrastructure, not art?
But it's
iconic, isn't it? Everyone.
Yeah, and it symbolises, because it was to symbolise, it was to be the gateway to Melbourne as coming in from the airport. So what it is, a composition of composition of comments about gateways. There's walls, there's a yellow wall, there's the red sticks which we saw as a picket fence, there's the big yellow cantilevered stick which we saw as a contemporary gateway. In as much as it's like boom gates in car parks, which are usually yellow, and it was in the up position sort of thing when he's come in. So it carried a whole lot of ideas about coming into the city and that sort of thing.
And interesting that with the yellow and there's kind of a continuation of linking back to Vault.
Yes.
In quite a number of your works, isn't there?
Well, it is, yeah. It turned us onto yellow, but it also turned other people like ARM onto it, because they referenced the Vault sculpture in Story Hall, and then a couple of other things that they've done. They keep making those sorts of references.
Yeah, so really it's about it more. It's like a dialogue, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
With the city as it's evolving and shifting.
Yeah. And also then there's things like Stonehenge that we did, the Stonehenge Visitors and Exhibition Centre, where we made conscious decision, because Stonehenge is in fact not very big. It looks very big, but in fact it's not very big. But we made a decision that since that it was about 4.7 meters high, Stonehenge, so it's not that high. We made a decision to make the Visitors Centre not as high, and not to be a sort of
in competition,
a column and beam type reference to me. So it didn't look like, it didn't sort of look like the thing, because there's been other visitor centres around the world where they take what the visitor centre is referring to and they reference it in the building, and we felt that was totally inappropriate sort of thing to do.
And it links back to this discussion about scale and what scale to do things, and in relation to what's around them. And also like expressions of respect and acknowledgement too for for history.
And then the last little quick comment is just about the Australian Pavilion in Venice, which was another competition that we won, which essentially we made it just a completely black box and visually without windows. And it just sat there. But one of the things that we did like about it was that it was on the edge of the canal, but we were able to nestle it back into the trees, and it in a funny sort of way, it referenced the edge of trees in the sense that this was Australia coming to Europe, a reversal of the process, coming to Europe and making a statement, sort of in Venice. That this is Australia and here we are, but also very subtly having that sort of subtle reference or acknowledgement of the
environment around
it, and a reference back to the traditional owners of and ongoing owners of Australia.
And I think with that one too, it's like, because the previous, the iconography of the previous the original pavilion, was very much a certain idea of Australia. So also that idea has probably shifted over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's Indeed. A great narrative between those projects. John, thank you.
So that's it.
And delivered very promptly too. I like that. Very good. I'm going to turn to Weis now, who's Creative Director at Broached Commissions. Lou has 27 years experience within the commercial arts, filmmaking, journalism, creating major projects for international arts and design festivals and directing Melbourne Design Week in 2010. Lou has consulted to the Australia Council, the Victorian Government and the City of Melbourne on art strategy. Broached Commissions has held a survey show of their applied arts collection at the Ian Potter Centre at the NGV and UCCA in Beijing. Their work is widely collected in Australia and internationally. Broached Consulting does public space and public art commissioning for large precincts. Currently, they are in the process of delivering programs for Lend-Lease, Mirvac, Caden and Charter Hall, amongst others. So great to have you with us too, Lou. I think do you want to share your screen, Lou?
Sure.
And I think we were going to start with you kind of talking a bit more about Broached and your role as a creative strategist, or
yeah, I mean,
on those lines.
Yeah, I'm actually just going to read something that I wrote.
Perfect.
It'd probably be better if I read something someone else wrote, but I'm going to read what I wrote. First, thank you for having me. And I use these speaking engagements as an opportunity to cast a slightly skeptical gaze over what it is I do. At Broach, we internally produce applied art collections that are narrative-driven and focus on the impact of globalization on material culture. This image is the poster from our latest and ongoing collection titled Recall, which deals with how modernism was born out of the industrial innovations of the Victorian era. Rather than being a break with the 19th century, modernism is simply the commercial arts pivoting the aesthetics of power away from feudal regimes to democratic market-driven ones. Our work has isolated a singular fact about commercial artists. Their role is to give form to power. The more public art we do, the more we realise it is essentially an extension of applied arts, and by virtue of that, it sits within the realm of the commercial arts. I must stress that this talk reflects my experience, which is almost entirely within large-scale property development. It only partially reflects the reality of creating work at a university or a hospital, for instance. Within those large developments, we have almost exclusively dealt with people who are earnestly trying to convey meaningful narratives in the public realm. This little rant is about structural issues, not individuals or certain corporate entities. Applied arts are usually interior furnishings that describe the ideological and style preferences of the owner of a home or an institution. Public art aspires to achieve much the same role. So, who are the powerful in relationship to commercial artists? The powerful control the brief. Commercial artists, on the other hand, point towards what is desirable in the world. They paint a picture of an ideal. The client chooses from that catalogue of utopias what best reflects their mission, and then they tend to commodify it. Art is meant to be separate from the process of commodification. It has scarcity rather than commodity value. Public art sits somewhere between design and art as a discipline. It is often forced to straddle a reflection on some aspect of human life and presenting a positive image of the client. Public art is almost always humanist. It conveys the possibility, even after horrific crimes have been committed, to stand up and fight, to live within a society that listens to its better angels, even if that angel is the artist saying, all is lost. In keeping with 3 decades of neoliberalist government policies, Australia has shifted the responsibility of public art towards public-private partnerships that are entirely in the hands of corporations. It is the big developers who build public space now and then hand it back to councils. It is the developer who nurtures the creative development process and delivers the built sculptural outcome. Therefore, public art often reflects the desires within large corporations not to offend anyone, not the woke or the racist. It is clear we're living in an era, certainly in Australia, where our most senior levels of government no longer have the desire to celebrate the aspirations of democracy, one being the possibility of a radical pluralism. We all know that the decline of democratic institutions, especially that of the traditional free media, is paralleled by the rise of social media's radical polarisation. Public art cannot stem this tide. But in the context of a democratic society, it should be addressing these issues as a matter of urgency. There is a reason why we cannot progress on the emergencies of our day, yet we keep doing art about climate change rather than about the decline of democracy to enact any kind of meaningful policies. Public art that is commissioned by the powerful is mostly fun or engaging or a curiosity. It is almost always beautiful, but it is rarely confronting. Which is what democracy can be for 49% of the people who are seeing their preferred party and their policies in opposition. Although this one work by Anish Kapoor is an exception, and I'm sure there are many others. The most viscerally honest public artworks are memorials to atrocities, mainly because they are usually commissioned by governments who have decided to atone for their sins or memorialise the suffering of those they sent to war. These works speak directly to governments gone wrong. Every project I've worked on over the last 35 years was a coordinated effort between government, corporations, arts managers, and artists. Public art for me has always been part of the technocratic conditions of contemporary democracy. That is why the most technically adroit artists, Anish Kapoor, Alicia Kwaja, Ai Weiwei, Jeff Koons, and Oliver Eliasson, to name a few, define the practice in our times. They all sit between industrial design and art practices. Public art will continue to be largely confined by what the client is willing or capable of accepting as the binding conditions of society. Most public art in Australia, outside institutional commissions, will address our history and our contemporary culture in a gentle way. Within their limited ideological remit, corporations are trying to explore interesting narratives, whilst governments are reflecting their own inability to be boldly democratic by failing to see the relationship between their own form of governance and the potential radicalism of art. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. I muted myself so I wouldn't interrupt.
Well, if you wanted to interrupt, I wouldn't mind it.
No, okay. So there's a lot of provocations in that, which I think...
Yeah, and I guess none of us are, a few of us, I should say, are ideologically pure. And I would say that more than just myself, there are other guests on this panel who have done substantial work for governments that are less than democratic.
Yeah, and I suppose I have a post-it note that I keep on my computer that we need agitators and healers. And I think some works, a work is hardly ever going to be able to fulfill all the things that potentially need to be addressed. And I think often a lot the kind of aspirations or the expectations of what an artwork can do or fix are actually too high, but perhaps it can be part of something that shifts something. But, I'm positive in nature, as you know.
And I'm less so.
I know. I'm going to segue to Barbara, just because I know we're a bit tight for time, and then hopefully we can just come together at the end for a few thoughts between us. But thank you very much, Lou. And now to introduce Barbara Flynn, who's Director of Barbara Flynn Proprietary Limited. Barbara is an art and curatorial advisor to city and state government, educational institutions, foundations, development companies and architectural firms. She has overseen several of the most prestigious public art projects achieved or underway in Australia, working with leading Australian and international artists to guide the creation of a singular new works of art for the public domain. She was curatorial advisor to Barangaroo Delivery Authority, is that right? Delivery Authority and Lend Lease for Barangaroo between 2014 and 16. Curatorial advisor to the City of Sydney for the City Centre between 2013 and 16, during which she drafted the City Centre Public Art Plan that was unanimously adopted by the Sydney City Council in July 2013. But her work, she's done a lot of work in Sydney, but her work is not confined to Sydney. And one of my personal favourites is by Mike Hewson that has transformed Wollongong's Crown Street Mall, so like the main mall of the town, And you worked with the City Council on that, Barbara, I understand. It's just
That's
a beautiful work, one that I travelled on the train specifically to go and see. Would you like to share your screen?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Let's see. Here we go.
Yeah, that's good to start the show.
Yes.
Play from start, just at the top.
Yes.
Left. Yeah.
I'm just moving it into position. Thanks.
Cool.
So does everyone see an orange slide? Yeah.
Yep.
That's
so
good.
Everyone, hello. And I'm speaking today from Gadigal land and would also like to acknowledge the owners of this land and any and all Aboriginal people who are joining us today. And thank you, Charlotte. And thanks everyone for your presentations, which I found really interesting. Charlotte posed two questions for me. The first, I won't linger on, but it's about whether I thought percent for public art schemes led to sort of significant, substantial public art commissions. I'm often in a position to advise a current average for Sydney would be something like Australian 2.5 to 3 million, for a project. I think it's self-evident that the more money, the larger, the more generous the budget that can be allocated, the better, the more that artists can do. But actually, it was your second question I really wanted to get into, and that was a question about whether, working as I have with Australian artists and international artists, if I thought that over time the way I work has shifted, and also whether the understanding of what a public art project or what an artist can do has shifted. And I thought that was a really intriguing question. So I think to start, there's certain things that haven't changed at all in the way I like to work, and that would be probably putting the artist at the front, like foregrounding the artist, and really understanding what they need and what they want. I think also approaching projects intellectually has been important to me, really working to know and possess the knowledge of what artists are doing in Australia and also worldwide. I think it's extremely important, but always with the objective of doing something, setting up a situation where an artist can really do something that's worth doing. I think what has changed about me is probably that I'm much less patient than I was at the start of doing these projects, which is probably about 15 years ago. I'm sort of becoming more adamant, bloody-minded, making people uncomfortable. It's, I get angry, impossible, but it's really all in pursuit of all these things, all these, solving problems basically, so that artists can really realize their visions in the end. And I find it very interesting to be the person negotiating between the artist and whoever the commissioner is. I think also I've become more intolerant of fear. The use of the term appropriate, and also the assumptions that get made. I think that often there are very low expectations of the audience, underselling the public when the public is highly intelligent. So, talking to the people I work with, I try to see if we can avoid those sorts of, unfair and actually quite presumptuous assumptions and, just not talk down to people, basically. So how has art changed? I want to show you this image. I think that what I've done, or, all through these years, I think that probably art today, these projects for the public realm have more emphasis and relevance to real life. Maybe they're sociological. They might be involved with having a behavioral effect on the public. This is Olafur Eliasson's very recent work. We just installed this, or, he did in September, and it'll be dedicated and open to the public in April. It's called Roof for Stray Thoughts, and it's at Circular Quay, Sydney. It's the AMP Capital Project. It's for Quay Quarter Tower by 3XN. And I'd like to acknowledge the architects on this project because it's very important, the way we work up these projects with the artists. So, Olafur is extremely well known. He likes to recreate something he's witnessed firsthand, but he doesn't reveal, and also to reveal how it's made. But he's also, in speaking with him through the years of this project, he's very interested in experience and how people experience the works. And even, whether after you've experienced something and seen it, if your behavior changes as you move away and, reconnect with the world around you, the neighborhood around you. I think extremely, important to me, and I'm not myself Aboriginal, and projects where we work with Aboriginal artists like the great Ioane Scarce, this image from Central Park, I defer, I get advice. I just realize how little I know. But, for example, this work, a lot of what I've learned through this particular project called Ectopia, and this is in a Foster and Partners, very shallow, very neutral, very beautiful foyer space at Central Park, Sydney, is, this extraordinary grace of an artist like Ioane, and also understanding, and this comment came up earlier today, that, what we're walking on is not at all what was there, concrete covering what was there and the brutality of what's been obliterated. So in this case, of course, the work, it refers to the death and sickness caused by the atomic testing at Maralinga, where Ioane is from, medical experiments, the calipers that were used to measure the heads, of Aboriginal people, blood, clear reference to massacre. But again, with Ioane's work, coupled with the brilliance of allowing people to experience this, leaving it open-ended, someone might walk into this foyer and simply be thrilled and delighted by, the obvious beauty and, the physical attributes of this work of art. It's elective. And I think, the way that this particular artist works in allowing people to come to things and make their own decisions is extremely important and significant. Or in the hands of Pippa Lottie, just getting into an experience of art that's completely different and an entirely joyous one, but I would say no less profound. This is her work, again, at Central Park. These are down projections. It's the only projection work by Pippa Lottie wrist anywhere in the world, which is exciting, I think, for Australia and for Sydney. And I guess if I could really summarize what's changed, in my opinion, is that I think these artists like a Ioane and a Pippa Lottie, I think that how they're communicating their language, and Judy Watson, it's ever more refined, sophisticated. The visual language that you're all using in your way of communicating with the public has become so extraordinarily clear and adept and powerful over time. So these are all projects that I've had the privilege to curate, and really a lot of them are very recently completed, and that's been kind of miraculous. I always think these projects are it's a miracle when they actually get up. This is Agatha Goth-Snape's work called The Noblest, and the title is derived from a line of the Greek poet Pindar that's reproduced on the facade of the building at lower left, which you will know as the 1939 so-called Sydney Water Board building. That was the site, full name Metropolitan Water, Sewerage and Drainage Board, which stood on the site and was used by Sydney Water from 1939 to 2009. The full phrase of Pindar is the noblest of the elements is water. And I think this is interesting because one of the questions for the panel generally was, can art affect change? And in this case, Agatha's taking water as the content of the work and making a statement that water is fundamental to civilization and to our survival. So there's a message here which is so apparent to everyone. And, we can take it as a reminder, we can take it as a prod to get on with it, get on with the work of, doing something about what's happening, climate change and what's happening in our world. There are other threads in this work. I mean, Agatha, and there's been the great exhibition that you did, Charlotte, at MoMA, multi-layered work, extraordinary. But this also took as its inspiration and Agatha's starting point, the culture of Sydney Water, which in the 1930s was quite exceptional. It was run by someone named Dr. T.H. Upton, who seems to have been a visionary. And the building itself, which Agatha really got into, was very, very innovative. Air conditioning, light well, from floor to ceiling. And even more interesting, innovative in a way that was really good for the workforce. It was kind of like they did wellness before we had that cliche word, wellness. So again, Agatha working with all of those sorts of themes, it was a culture of valuing people. And I think sometimes when an artist comes into a situation, which is really inspiring like that one in a human way, having to do with people and treating people well, the outcome, the result, the final work of art can be really exceptional. This is, showing the mosaic, which was made in Saltenbergo, Italy by Travisanuto, extraordinary company, sending it home during COVID, with many artisan mosaic makers, arrived in Sydney ahead of schedule. I mean, did just an extraordinary job. So finally, to finish, another core question for the panel was, how can we respectfully and significantly acknowledge country while also recognizing colonial and settler histories and impacts? And I'm just quoting from Melissa's text, very interesting text. So again, not myself Aboriginal, and really deferring. And in this case, Jonathan Jones, the artist, learning a lot from him and seeing what he wanted to do. I mean, always, I get the clients to just agree to follow what the artists want to do, basically. It's a project in 5 elements. Again, it's the next door block to where Oliver Eliasson's work is. This is Key Lane, Sydney. It's on Sydney Harbour at Circular Quay. In that location, there were absolutely no archaeological remains of Aboriginal people, none, gone. But obviously these stories lived on, of Aboriginal people who managed the land so impeccably, the land and the waters of Sydney Basin for millennia. So Jonathan, what I was able to secure for him was at the beginning of the project, 1.5 years just to think about what he would do. So through a lot of research, reflection, and also talking with a group of 4 advisors, all Aboriginal cultural leaders and elders, he decided to dedicate the work to the story of one Aboriginal man whose name is Erabanu. He was the first Aboriginal man to be captured by the British, the Europeans, at a time they thought they could learn language and culture by capturing people. So there are 5 artwork elements. They're all translated into Eora language. This is one that's called Betunyo, or oysters, Guara, flags, Bengadi, meaning ornament, Wirrong means Sydney Cove, Magara, fish. And these are, I'm just going to scroll through the images. So Erabanu is, as it happens, central to the story of the initial contact of Aboriginal people to the European newcomers. His name appears 8 times in the early chronicles of that contact. And he was captured, as I mentioned before. So this is the precast concrete wall. We poured the artwork in this case. It was extremely tense that it failed. I mean, the project would have failed. And you can see the beauty of this imagery that Jonathan came up with. So the idea of the shackle, but also when he first saw the shackle, apparently Erabanu actually thought he was being given something freely. So this juxtaposition between captive shackle, but also the freedom of flight, the feather, the imagery of the feather, and then depicting that on the wall. You can see the upper right image of how that is depicted. And it's depicted relentlessly across the wall. You cannot miss the message that's being conveyed by the artist. He'd been taken forcibly from his family. Again, it was interesting to hear Judy talk about looking across the harbor. It's thought that he was actually from across the harbor, and he kept looking wistfully across the harbor. I mean, tragic story. And in the end, succumbed himself to smallpox. He is buried, or was buried, on this site. So an extraordinary project, again, taking a walk, anyone walking or visiting through the site, extreme grace of Jonathan Jones in the way he placed these 5 artwork elements, not interfering with any of the architects, and there were 3, not with the heritage buildings and the heritage architects, not with the wayfinders. So I hope you can see it. We're also just completing that work. The lighting of it will be done probably this month, and I think probably the 2 works by Eliasson and Jones will be dedicated, I don't know, sometime around, maybe together. That's what we're hoping, around April. So thanks so much, everybody. It's been great to be part of this.
Thank you, Barbara. And there was a nice connection going back to what Judy spoke about originally too, with the shells and the middens and how the lime, was used to kind of fill in the brickwork. Exactly. Now kind of brought back. So, at the start, I'd been kind of saying that I felt that, part of perhaps the more interesting works were revealing things, but then I suppose, with some of the projects that were just been shared, it's also sometimes it's about maybe reinstating or restoring or something too. There's, I suppose, a different approach for every context in which we're working.
Yeah.
But what you said about particularly the importance of kind of advocacy, and your budgets are way bigger than my budgets. We've got to have talk about that.
They're not all that big. Believe me, but that's
I suppose you've shown what you can do when you have that kind of.
Well, it's great if the city of Sydney negotiates those typically with the development companies, and you always hope they do a good job of negotiating, a sizable budget. But no, of course, some of the projects are in the a couple of $100,000 or $500,000 or but on average, I'd say that's probably a pretty reasonable average figure. And if I could say, John, Edge of the Trees. You may not realize this, and a lot of these projects have only just been finished and they're visible now, but there's like this 6-block area where all these artworks are now, but that one was the first in the neighborhood, so to speak. And it's extremely important. And we refer to it all the time. So, congratulations on that very early visionary success. And, the city of Sydney has also really earmarked the northern part of the city as an area encouraging, skyscrapers and artworks that might come along with them. So I think.
Robert, do you think any of this would have happened if there wasn't a public art master plan in place? Do you think that was foundational or not?
Well, that thing was, when I look at it now, it looks kind of delightful. I see why the council, it was unusual that they would all endorse it. That was good. But I think, there's so many people involved, a lot of curators, Jamie, all sorts of people working. And the city, though, it wasn't just that strategy. They also have their internal departments, the urban planners who really have set out what the plan might be for the northern part of the city. But what is amazing, and honestly, this has only become visible very recently, and Judy's bar is going in also very nearby, very soon. It's really in the last 6 to 8 months that these things have even become visible. It is like a transformation, to use this sort of cliche word. And a lot of it, I do believe, is due to the city of Sydney. People like Bridget Smythe, Clover Moore, who insist, they don't encourage, they just insist that development companies over a certain level of investment support art and culture. Wouldn't be happening otherwise.
I think we've nearly run out of time. So is there anyone would like to make a kind of final reflection or kind of thought?
I'd just like to quickly reflect something that you talked about, agitators and
healers.
And one of the joys of the Venice Pavilion is that every year the art thing comes up, Richard Bell turns up. Yeah. And Richard Bell is a master at being a Indigenous agitator for things, and he turns up and sets up his own embassy. But a few years back, he was invited to submit for it, and he came up with a proposition which was to wrap the pavilion in these huge chains, all wrapped up in chains, so you couldn't get into it. And that was his thing. Well, obviously he didn't get the job, but he then went on.
Not so far, John.
He then went on and built his own slightly smaller version of the pavilion on a barge, and would tow it around Venice at the time of the art
taunting
Biennale. And I just think that's just such a wonderful aspect of what happened there.
True. Judy, have you got anything you'd like to add?
There's a lot of things I could add, but I think I'm happy to give it to other people. But I do think that it's, I think that there's different things between making community art, which is a feel-good job that loses its magic after the process of people being involved. And it's got to be well thought through, and time will be the measure of its success. And I do love working with other people who are specialists in their field. And I think there's that whole thing about emotional sustainability too in your life as an artist, making your work and living and fulfilling you and making you go deeper into yourself. And in fact, when Lou was showing the work by Misha Ullman, that's one that I often talk about. Simone Mangos, the artist, showed me that work back in 1995. And it was just a really charged thing for me, walking in winter across to Bevelplatz and seeing this light coming out of the ground and then seeing what it was. And I think that, and Rachel Whiteread's work and others as well, showing the absence and the emptiness that holds so much within it, is really important to me, and it's what makes me feel and think. So that's the sort of thing. And in some of my work, there's scarification of people from that area. So some of the people who colonists have actually sort of painted, I've taken the scars, and the scars are remaining within the work. So you don't see it, but it's like those people are there, and of course they're there. And so it's that imagined presence. But I'll leave it to others now to finish.
I think it's a really good point you raised, though, too, around what it requires of artists, particularly to work, in this expanded way. I mean, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's pretty demanding work, but, when it goes well, I suppose, people can be happy with the outcome, but it's it actually requires a lot of the artist, no matter.
And I think that the term agitation is absolutely critical. All the works that we've spoken about today that do really shift your perception of place and provide a different perspective, that those artists are refusing to be kind of put where they're expected to be put. They're asking something different of the material and the space in which they're placing their work and placing their concepts. I look at the Jonathan Jones's work and the way that Barbara, that you just presented, the way that's inhabiting the ground plane and the wall and small adornment. And John, you touched on an architect versus an artist and where their place is. I mean, it's important for anyone out there, I think, listening, that is wanting to engage in the public realm as a creative. Agitate and push outside of where you're expected to be placed, and work with the team, whether it's an architect or various other consultants, in a way to push what's expected. I suppose that's pretty critical, and a common link in all of the successful projects that have been spoken about today.
Lou, would you like final words?
I mean, it's been great to hear from everyone, and I've learned something from every presentation. So I would just want to thank everyone for sharing what they have. I guess that, we public art is, just to reiterate, it is a very, very complex, expensive industrial process. It is essentially a form of architecture. It has to meet code. It has to adhere to incredibly stringent safety regulations and all of these things that completely inhibit the outcome almost from the outset. And I don't think that almost any public art really challenges anything about our built environment, about the way that we're going about resource use, the culture of extraction that is destroying the planet. I think that it's completely part and parcel of the paradigm that is completely unsustainable. But it's the life that I've chosen, so I kind of choose to describe the reality that we can't get out of, any of us, as much as we might be doing art about climate change or colonization or whatever. We are perpetuating those systems through the process of enacting. And that's why my last slide was that quote from Frederick Jameson. But, we keep trying.
Absolutely. I think we're going to leave it there, but I'd like to thank all of you so much for speaking. I think we actually got to cover quite a lot of ground. We did a good job, and I think we've got lots of things to kind of take away with us. So thank you so much, and thank you also to the Melbourne Art Fair for bringing us together on a Saturday afternoon.
Yes.
Thanks to you, Charlotte. Thanks to you, Charlotte.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.